And Ellie, if you can continue to admit people, that'd be great, because I think people will kind of just come in throughout. Let me see. Trish, can you unmute yourself?
Yep.
Great. So I'll just go straight to this slide. If you can see that, okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Fantastic.
Okay, welcome everybody. So nice to see so many people joining this workshop today. So my name's Trish Morgan. I'm the centre head at Maggie's at Oldham, and prior to starting at Maggie's, I worked in the Royal Oldham Hospital NHS Trust, and my experience is in bowel cancer and surgery and cancer research for more than 30 years. So Maggie's, as Jonathan said, we've been going for 26 years now, and the Maggie's program is because of a legacy left by Maggie Keswick-Jenks, who had a breast cancer diagnosis. And when she was diagnosed and when she was told, unfortunately, that her cancer was incurable, she set up a blueprint of cancer care, but in a very different way, and moving from a clinical model to more of a caring model where cancer didn't sort of define you, and all the treatments were left to the clinical team, but that emotional, practical and psychological element was able to be delivered in the centre. And our centres, as Jonathan said, are beautiful, warm spaces. They are unique in their build, so they're one-offs, and you'll be able to see them all in pictures on the Maggie's website. There's lots of information on the Maggie's website about what we do in each of the centres and where they are, and contact details. So please have a look whenever you've got time. So today, what we're going to discuss really is cancer in the workplace, because 1 in 2 of us will be affected by a cancer diagnosis at some point in our lives. And I don't think there's anybody these days that doesn't know of somebody with a cancer diagnosis, whether that's family, friends, or work colleagues. And it's really important, I think, to have an overview of cancer briefly, but also the treatments that are available, and really the impact that that has on the person themselves, but also the husbands, wives, partners, family unit, and the impact not only from a emotional point of view, but also a psychological point of view. Some of the challenges that you might face in the workplace if you're trying to support somebody with a diagnosis, and how you can support Maggie's, but also support your employee in that communication, in that understanding, and then what we'll do is we'll either any questions either throughout, or we can leave questions till the end. So some of the subjects that I'm going to talk about today might hit home sort of a bit personal. So if you find it difficult to listen to what I'm going to say, please obviously feel free to leave. It is the reality of what's going on in cancer treatment now, but we'll also talk about that emotional impact and that cognitive impact. So as I say, if there's anything that you're finding it difficult to listen to, or you're struggling, or you have questions, then please get in touch. Next slide, please. So there are just the facts about cancer. 2 million people living with or living with an ongoing diagnosis of cancer in the UK today, and that number is continually increasing, and part of that is because of COVID still, unfortunately, and still with the impact of the cost of living. Because of delays in diagnostics, unable to get GP appointments, unfortunately, we've been seeing at every centre more people with a diagnosis that might not be curative, or they may be at a later stage of their pathway than you would hope. So, and that's because of delays, unfortunately, because people are presenting later. So over 300,000 people are diagnosed each year. Again, that number is going up. We're looking at numbers from like Cancer UK at the moment, and yeah, the numbers are increasing, and we'll continue to see that increase, I think, for many, many more years. And half the population of the UK will have a cancer at some point in their life, and yeah, so that's 1 in 2, which is quite a stark statistic, really. Of those people, 560,000 people are in the current workforce, and there's maybe more people that want to work, because I'll go into a bit more detail in further slides about, the purpose of work and how that impacts people, because, it gives you purpose, it gives you something to think about other than cancer. But there's lots of other issues that we can talk about from that point of view. And then there's estimated that actually, which is doubled, the amount of people in the workforce by 2030 is going to be over 1.1 million. So you are key, really, to helping and supporting your employees to return to work, if that is what they want to do, because there's no real time frame. Some people might be off for a couple of months, some people might be off for a couple of years, and it's really sort of what you can do to help people get back into work, and the understanding behind some of the issues that people face when they try to come back to work. Next slide, please. So this is just a couple of questions that you can just have a think about, and you don't have to write it down or anything like that, but how many different types of cancers do you think exist? 10% of cancers occur due to hereditary factors, yes or no? So that's like genetics running in families. Name 2 potential risk factors for developing a cancer. So if you think about sort of adverts, sort of lifestyle, adverts that you see on the telly, and yeah. And number 4, cancer occurs as a result of abnormal cell division. So how does cancer sort of start off? So number 1, surprisingly, there's over 200 types of cancer, and which is a lot. A lot of us know about sort of common ones like bowel cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, bladder cancer, but there's so many different types of cancers that might be like hematology cancers. People know about leukemia, but they might not know about myeloma or lymphoma. So there's different types in each sort of subsection. 10% of cancers are actually due to like genetics. So if you have a family history then of any type of cancer, then certain genetics start earlier than others. But if you have a family history of the more common cancers, then sometimes it's just worth having a chat with your GP or a family history clinic, and they'll be very willing to either offer some screening or refer to genetics testing at a hospital. This can be really important in women and men with breast cancer, bowel cancer, and sort of like pancreatic or the GI tract. And yes, it is true, cancer occurs as a result of abnormal cell division. What happens is the cancer cells multiply and divide and form either a mass or are in the bloodstream and then travel to different areas of the body. So we said, as we say, cell division occurs to replace those cells that have died or that need to be repaired. So we have cells that die every day, millions of cells that die every day in our bodies, and they either need to be repaired or they need to be reproduced, and they do that normally in a controlled way. However, with a cancer diagnosis, is that pathway is interrupted, and the cells can mutate and change, and those cells then multiply and divide, quite often doubling in either a short period of time or over a long period of time, and present themselves in the form of lumps or masses, and unfortunately then can invade other organs or other structures, and also can infiltrate the bloodstream, where the cells are then carried around the body to other areas. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief overview, because some of the things I'm going to talk about is quite complicated. So I'll just give you a brief overview of what the 4 main types of treatment that are used for people with cancer. Now, they might be used as a standalone, but they also might be used in combination and at varying times. So most people know what surgery is. It means an operation to remove that cancer, that tumor. But people can be given radiotherapy before an operation, and radiotherapy is like X-ray treatment. It can also be classed as targeted treatment these days as well. And basically, it's an X-ray beam delivered through the body externally and infiltrates the tumor, and it can be very precise in its position to sterilize the area and almost fry the tumor. But with radiotherapy, there's risks, there's complications, because it hits everything in its path. So, for example, if somebody had a bladder cancer, then externally in women, it would then also hit the uterus. It could also hit the bowel behind it and the bladder itself. And the same for rectal cancers. So that's externally, it would hit the rectum, but then in men, it would also hit the prostate and any blood vessels that are around. So targeted radiotherapy is a good therapy to have if you can, but the complications, again, are quite high. Risks of surgery. An operation means an anaesthetic. Surgery involves potentially a long time under an anaesthetic, which has complications for the heart, the lungs, blood clots, wound infections, lots of different side effects which are specifically related to surgery. So you might become anemic, you might have problems then with bladder function or bowel function. The effect that it has on the lungs. So again, people are selected whether surgery is an option. If surgery is not an option, and that can be because there are blood vessels major blood vessels very close to the tumour, or that the tumour cannot be removed fully, leaving potential disease behind. Chemotherapy people mostly know as drug treatment, and chemotherapy uses chemicals to kill those cancer cells that have been dividing and hopefully shrink tumours and remove those cancer cells from the body. But it also affects good cells as well. So you see that person on chemotherapy on the television, and all the time they look as if they're head down the toilet and really bad side effects. But some people don't have that many side effects. There are common ones like a sore mouth, whether people are going to lose their hair, that sickness, that nausea, neuropathy, which is pins and needles and skin changes in the fingers and in the toes. But chemotherapy is almost a first line of treatment, and that can be either after surgery, can be before surgery. So as I said, these ones tend to be used either in conjunction with each other or separately. Some people might have all these treatments. And then we get to the newer sort of treatments that are around. So some tumours are hormone receptive, which means that the hormones in the body actually stimulate the tumour to grow. So some of you might have heard of breast cancer like HER2 positive. And there was a lot in the press a few years ago about something called Herceptin, which was a drug. And basically, these hormone drugs are really, really expensive, but they actually target the specific hormones that are causing the tumour to grow. And biotherapies are targeted treatment, but they use your own body cells to create new cells that are free of cancer. So it can be called immunotherapy. So what that does is it reduces your own immunity down to a very, very low level where you're prone to infection, you're prone to really bad complications. And then what happens when your immune system is so low, these drugs then stimulate your body to create new cells, but without cancer in them. And then targeted treatments now are being used. There's so much research going on. And in certain tumors, they can actually find the DNA in that particular cell, so that protein that's in that particular cell, and target that cell that the protein is affected. So it leaves good cells alone, and it only targets the cancer cells, which is a huge way forward, really, in cancer treatment. And it basically just changes the way that cell looks. So targeted treatments moving on all the time. They can even now actually chemically change that cell to make it a good cell, which it's unbelievable, really. So a lot of those are in their infancy, but trials are ahead all the time. So just because somebody might say, oh, there's no treatment for me, there's potentially always treatment, but that might be palliative or it might be curative. People can still have treatment even if they have a palliative diagnosis. And palliative means that we're not able to cure somebody, but we can certainly give them some treatment to give them more time and to help with their symptoms. Next slide, please. The impact of a cancer diagnosis and some of the side effects, which tend to be the sort of the physical ones. I mentioned that. So not all cancers cause you to lose your hair. It also depends on the drug treatment that you're being given, whether you lose your hair or not. And it's not only your hair, it would be your eyebrows, your eyelashes, and all the hair in your body, basically, because chemotherapy treatment is systemic. And what that means is that it affects the whole body rather than a localized area, whereas radiotherapy affects a localized area. You might have heard of a term called chemo brain. Chemo brain or brain fog, and it's a very common side effect for people, that they have cognitive issues, sort of remembering things, or it's almost like that forgetfulness, or trying to remember the words for things. It's almost the brain is so overwhelmed with what's going on that other things sort of are less of a priority. I mean, we've all done it. Things like, we put our jar of coffee in the fridge and then think, why did I do that? Or, you walk into the kitchen and you don't know what you've walked in for. But chemo brain is sort of a bit more, people get frustrated because they might not be able to do the things that they did before their treatment, just to the same caliber. And when we talk about work, that chemo brain or brain fog does have a huge impact for people that are either in work or going to be coming back to work. Sore mouth, a lot of chemotherapy treatments, especially cause problems with the mucous membranes. So that's that nice pink sort of moist tissue that's inside the mouth. Mouth ulcers, fatigue. Fatigue is more than just being tired. Fatigue is sort of like tea and coffee, or they might not want spicy food. They might want sort of low salt. And the appetite is like, because they're feeling fatigued, they can't be bothered to cook anything, and there's no interest there. But to eat healthily is really, really important to repair those cells, and for energy, and for protein to repair everything, and to have a good diet. And in this day and age, with the cost of living crisis, it's actually quite expensive to eat really healthily, and to have something that you really want. So tasty things, people might want something that's refreshing, like pineapple juice, or kiwi, or want to avoid things that are really, really spicy and just want plain food. So most people that are going through treatment don't know how they're going to feel until that day, because they might feel, ill on most days. And what we suggest is that they have something either in the freezer, like soups, or something, build up drinks, or something that when they don't really want to eat or prepare a meal, that they have something either at work or at home that's beneficial. The nausea and vomiting we've sort of covered. Diarrhea, constipation, all treatment can affect the bowels and their function. And I don't know if you know, but 70% of your actual immunity and how you fight off infection comes from the bowel itself. It's where all your absorption takes place of your nutrients and the fluids that you take. So when those are interrupted because of cancer treatment, it can affect people quite significantly. They may lose weight, they may be dehydrated, but it also upsets the balance of salts and sugars in the body. They may have pain in that affected area, whether they've had surgery and it's scarring, or whether they've got actually tumor related pain. Quite common in those people that have maybe a liver cancer. They get pain on that right hand side, just under the ribs. So it's really important that people's pain relief is managed as well. And I briefly touched on peripheral neuropathy, and that is that pins and needles feeling. So the nerve endings in the fingers and in the toes get affected by the chemotherapy, and it can be quite painful, obviously, to put shoes on to walk, but also if you're touching something that's metal, or you need to get something out of the freezer or the fridge, you'll feel those heat extremities or those cold extremities so much more than other people. At all our Maggie centres, everything's really thought about with somebody that has cancer. So all our like door handles are made of wood, and texturally there's nothing like no sharp objects, and even when holding a kettle, if you've got like a metal kettle or pots and pans and things like that, people really have to be so careful. Or if they're going into the freezer to get something, to put a pair of gloves on, because the sensation goes in the fingers. You might not be able to hold a knife and fork. If you were to stub your toe, as we all do on the end of the bed, those people with peripheral neuropathy may get a cut, may get a blister, but they wouldn't be able to feel it. So they need to check their hands and they need to check their feet on a regular basis, like every day, because the skin can come off, the nails can come off, and it's quite a miserable side effect to have. And that side effect can last a long time, may never go completely, and it can be in varying degrees. Next slide. There's no time frame on the longer term side effects that people experience. You would hope that if somebody has finished treatment completely, say has had surgery and then has had chemotherapy, then it can take 6 months for the chemotherapy to actually work its way out of the body. Surgery, recovery from surgery, you would hope, dependent on how long that surgery was for, how long somebody was in hospital, did they have any complications, that can take time, and there's no time frame on that. If things were straightforward, you could maybe say, okay, 6 to 8 weeks, but nothing is set in stone, and it's a very individual thing. But the psychological impact that people experience, we see that in Maggie's every day. Most people go onto autopilot, or they're almost like a rabbit in the headlights when they're first told that they have a cancer diagnosis. And it takes a while to process actually what's going to happen, that they're going to be on this journey of uncertainty, and that nobody knows, nobody can give that guarantee that it's going to work. And there may be something in the future. So even though you have a cancer diagnosis, that long-term effect, whether it's because of the treatment that you've had, can be lifelong. So psychologically, I think we'll talk in a minute about certain sort of emotions and things that people mainly feel when they've got a diagnosis. And if they're in autopilot, they're so focused on getting treatment done that everything else sort of goes to the sideline, and then eventually those things that have been bothering people tend to sort of leak out, and it does need to be talked about because the impact is huge. Dependent on where the tumours are or what treatment people are having, it does have an effect on sexual dysfunction. It might be temporary, but it might also be permanent. And again, that is a big sort of impact on some people, on relationships. Cardiac problems, yeah, chemotherapy, drug treatment. It's one of the major side effects of chemotherapy, and even having surgery is for somebody maybe to have a heart attack, or problems with chemotherapy can cause cardiac issues, to the point where chemotherapy might need to be stopped, or other treatment might need to be stopped. Lung fibrosis, that's just fibrosis is just sort of scarring of the lungs. but that can be because of being under anaesthetic, or again being under having radiotherapy or chemotherapy. And especially if the person has had like a lung cancer diagnosis, because they may have had surgery and a section of their lung removed, then radiotherapy. So breathing problems can be a longer term side effect. We talked before about the way that sort of hormones work with relating to the body, and our own hormones can change. If they're a gynecological cancer, if it's a breast cancer, a thyroid cancer, these are all sort of hormones which affect so many other organs in our body. And if those are actually then artificial hormones or no hormones to stimulate the growth of the tumor, then it can cause an impact. Skin reactions says for itself. You know, if you've had treatment, especially chemotherapy or radiotherapy, it can affect your skin. You can, if you have radiotherapy, you can have burn areas and irritation. Urinary gastrointestinal problems. Yeah, we mentioned before about sort of the bowel, the bladder, sexual functions that are all related to having treatment in different forms, but they can also be a short-term or a long-term problem, or even a lifelong problem, which has a huge impact on somebody's psychological recovery. Neurological problems, obviously depend on where the cancer is, but if there's any either damage to any area in the brain, or the chemotherapy's affected it, or the radiotherapy's affected it, can cause problems which may mean that somebody may not be able to work again. Anything with relating to cancer and treatment, if those long-term effects are lifelong, it will have an impact on somebody's home life, somebody's work life, and personal life. So when we were talking about sort of chemo brain before, so it's all to do with that cognitive impact on the brain. So yeah, short-term memory loss, that fogginess, you know, what have I come into the kitchen for, and then walk out again. That fatigue, that overwhelming sort of tiredness, which isn't helped by, you know, having a lie-in or just having a snooze. People have difficulty finding the right words, finding communication, conversation, trying to remember what somebody said an hour ago. They might have problems with their visual memory, or recalling things. The cognitive mind also can't deal with things that if somebody wants to do too many things at once. So it's easier to do one thing at a time. And you can make a list so that you're not overwhelmed, but people normally find their own way. And as I say, the cognitive impact can be either just through treatment, but it might, 70% of people, it will have gone probably a year after they've finished that treatment. So they have more difficulty in learning new skills and concentrating for long periods of time, which obviously has an impact when people are at work. Next slide, please. So yeah, it's what we've said. It can, you know, affect people when they're during treatment or after treatment. And most people are so aware of it that they do things to help themselves during those times. And Maggie's can help with that, whether it's help sort of making a list or prioritizing things, or not being so hard on themselves when they're not able to do things quite as well as they did before they had a cancer diagnosis. And most of the cognitive problems happen because of drug treatment or because they've had surgery. And a really, really small percentage of people, chemo brain or brain fog can last a lot longer, and maybe up to 10 years after they've finished treatment. So I was talking before about sort of that psychological impact that people have when they've got a cancer diagnosis. There might be, I won't go through all these, you can see for yourself, and that these emotional responses that we deal with every day at Maggie's, and knowing that people, they're not on their own, they're but how they feel is very individual. That shock, that disbelief that they've been diagnosed with a cancer. They tend to lose their identity. They feel as if they're being defined by that cancer diagnosis. And cancer doesn't define you, but it does certainly change the way that you think about things and the way that you might then continue to live your life. Some things are more important than others. You tend to feel quite insecure, feel threatened, anger, frustration. I know during COVID, some people were so angry because they couldn't get an appointment with their GP, and they knew something was wrong. So unfortunately, then they would present later in their disease, and if there was nothing that could be done, so somebody couldn't have surgery, or they were told that they had a life limiting condition, and to go and spend time with their family and make memories for the time what they had left. But at a time where people were shielding, people were not allowed to spend time with their families making those memories. So a lot of people felt robbed, I suppose, of that time, with that anger, that frustration, and really, really sad, really sad. And emotionally feeling lost, feeling that they've done something, they've let everyone down. That fear of the unknown, what's going to happen in the future, and nobody knows that. That fear of recurrence. Some people that have had surgery or chemotherapy, they're left with scarring. If they've had lots of sort of intravenous lines put in, they can cause scarring. Has somebody been left with a colostomy or a urostomy, which alters their body image? Has somebody lost their breast and they've got scarring? And I'm not sure if you're aware, but reconstruction surgery for breast cancer women and men is not classed as cancer treatment. It's classed as cosmetic. So quite often people have to wait quite a long time to have their reconstructive surgery. And psychologically, that has a huge impact on some people, and especially during COVID, because it wasn't classed as urgent, and not classed as part of their sort of ongoing pathway. So people are still now waiting, maybe 2 years since their surgery, waiting for reconstructive surgery. So it's a huge impact. Next slide, please. So we'll talk now a little bit about those carers of the people that have a cancer. And a carer can come into any sort of shape or form. So it can be a partner, a family member, a next door neighbour, a work colleague. And it's anybody that's affected by that diagnosis. But it's really important to keep in mind that you might have carers working in your department that are as affected by that cancer diagnosis as their loved one is. So to look for things like, that physical and emotional demand on that person that is caring for somebody with a cancer is really, really hard. Relationships tend to can be strained. If you stop being a husband or a wife or a partner and end up being a carer and having to do those things that it wasn't on the plan that you'd need to maybe bathe or, feed that loved one and try and hold down a job and cope with everything else that's going on. So it's to look out of the box a little bit when thinking about those carers. They may want to go to outpatient appointments with their loved one. Are you able to, give them that time off? Are those carers now working more because of the cost of living if their loved one isn't able to work? And they may want to be in work because it gives them purpose. Are they able to do more flexible working? Can they work from home? Have that right time off if there's an emergency, if there's some uncertainty or there's something going on that they're just struggling with. They are protected by the law against sort of discrimination, harassment and victimization. But it's also being compassionate and being kind. And they are really difficult conversations to have, but it's really important just to keep it in the back of your mind that the carers that might be working, but you might not have any clue of what's going on at home. They may choose not to tell you, but it's keeping that good work relationship, communication all the time, and keeping them sort of up to date and having that good relationship, really. Next slide, please. We said before about the role of people coming to work, and there's going to be more people in work than ever before that might have a cancer diagnosis. And there's also benefits of working. And if people can work, most people want to work because it gives them that focus outside of a cancer diagnosis. It gives them something else to think about rather than cancer and treatment all the time. It gives you structure. It gives you a sense of normality because nobody knows what the new normal is going to be. So what is normal? And normal may be from now on very different to how it was before. It can give people that security, that structure, as I said, gives people a purpose that they're doing something. We know that it helps with self-esteem and that you have a purpose in life. You do good, and it can help against low self-worth and depression. Some of the barriers against sort of working are really, really complex. We know that there sometimes can be rigid work policies or no policy at all. We know that the best thing to do is to have, regular, meaningful communication right at the start so that there's an understanding and there's a continuity from both sides. The other side of it is, we that as a workforce, employers running a business, there's going to be a financial impact. So, they don't want to lose out. And you want to do the right thing. And it's almost like, what is the right thing to do? If there aren't policies in place, or if they're very rigid, it may be that there might be a bit of give and take in that. And it's how you approach it really with that person. Next slide, please. So a lot of employers obviously sometimes come to us and they say, I don't know what to say. I don't want to put my foot in it. I'm trying to be a friend, but I'm also a manager. And I want to make sure that, you know, this is what that person wants. But I've got this policy that says this, this, and this. And again, it's that communication. You need, these things need to be, you know, actioned. And you know, we understand it's really, really difficult to deliver certain messages, and especially when it's relating to sort of like money. And you know, that might have people on 0-hour contracts. Well, their sort of benefits and maybe what they're entitled to do is you know, is less than others. Is it a fair system? And particularly relating to how long have they been with the company, is, you know, is there something that you can do to help these people either remain in work or want to come back to work? And yes, you do have to put your manager's hat on, but it doesn't mean that you have to distance yourself from what you need to talk about. A good manager is able to do both, that you're there as a friend, as a colleague, but yes, a manager. And they'll understand that you know, you have this role to play, but it can be done with compassion and, you know, and kindness. That quote, I want to make sure the individual is getting okay at work. Okay. No, you're not going to annoy them. And it is worth having regular check-ins. Is it like a phased return? Is that phased return working? Do you need to reduce it? Is there things you can do? Can they work at home? How can you support people when, you know, when people come back? And it's having that honest conversation really, because things may change. And, you know, if it's, they need time off for appointments, is it okay, can I work from home that day? Is it do they need to have like a different workstation area nearer to sort of like bathrooms or something, as if they've got some disturbance in their bladder or their bowel? Having those regular reviews about what's going on. Sometimes it can be with the partner, husband, wife, you know, whoever, to make sure that they're involved as well. And are they still able to do the job that they did before? If they're not, is there an alternative? So it can be really, really complex, really complex. Next slide, please. So when I said before, communication is key, it's very much, if you know what's happening, doesn't necessarily mean you have to do anything about it, but it's important that almost you're kept in the loop of, you know, it's not about mithering somebody. There has to be this sort of two-way communication between employer and employee. And it may be that you might find out about things if somebody's going for tests or investigations, and you might not know exactly what the outcome's going to be, but then at least you can sort of start preparing, okay, where do we go from here? And it's not about being nosy or you know, it's just about so that you're a little bit more aware of what's going on. So everyone will have different needs, but you'll only know this by keeping in touch with that person. And it may be that you'll agree, okay, I'll ring you next week, or if that's not convenient because somebody might not feel well, you might have a, you know, an email or a text or something. But it is about keeping in touch, because that person with cancer will feel quite lonely, but also during treatment, they probably don't want to think about work, but just having a text is like, I'm thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay as you can be at the moment. When people have finished treatment, it may not be finished treatment, and it may be that something is needed further on down the line. So it's taking things sort of step by step. Graded return to work. Are you giving them too much work to do? Are you giving them enough work to do? But it's keeping those communications going, really. And if the return to work isn't working, can it be re-explored? Can you do something differently? Do you have a policy that has a strict regime that it has to be over like 4 weeks, or does it have to be, can it be discussed that it can be a bit longer? So it really, really depends. But as I say, it's really important that there's communication, but continuity. What that person doesn't want either is to have a different employer or HR manager or whoever, line manager, contacting them at different times. So somebody's in charge, and that continuity should continue. Next slide, please. Any questions on that? No? Okay. Thinking traps. Okay, so when we do a lot of assuming, I think, with people, and we think that people often say, oh, you should be feeling a bit better by now, or oh, you look really well. You pass somebody on the corridor, oh, you look really well. But actually, they may look well, but they might not feel well. That if they are upset or angry, you might assume that somebody isn't coping very well. Sometimes positive scan results, so if somebody's had follow-up and their scan result is good, or things are stable, there's no evidence of disease, it doesn't necessarily mean that they might be feeling positive about it, because they might be just thinking, well, in 3 months' time it might have come back, or what if next week I find another lump, or anything. So it's those assumptions that we make, I think, sometimes, that we just need to be a little bit careful of. As I said before, if somebody does have a life-limiting illness, work becomes less important to somebody, and people have to make big decisions about what they want to do, and it's to be kind with that. Financially, somebody might not want to work, but they feel that they have to, and we've been seeing a lot of visitors to the centre that are going back to work probably earlier than they should do, because of the cost of living crisis and the financial implications of that. So it's a big thing at the moment. Also, people think, oh, with time you'll feel better, things will be fine, and sometimes they aren't. And again, just don't assume what you say is going to be the answer. You might not get an answer that you want to hear. And just because somebody doesn't want to talk about things now in this moment, it doesn't mean that that's what it's going to be in the future. And a lot of time people think, oh, I'm back at work. So, you're back at work, you're back 100%. And quite often it's not like that. Next slide, please. So when we talk about our behaviour, and I think we've all done it, you walk down the corridor and you say to somebody, hi, you okay? And you walk straight past. And is that because people don't know what to say? So actually saying nothing, you might think it is better actually, but for that person, it's probably worse. They're never going to, if you say to somebody, let me know if I can do anything. We've all done that as well. Let me know if you call me, if you want anything. And that again, that person is not going to phone you, or is not going to contact you because they want to be independent, they want to do things themselves. So if you're going to do something, say, do you want me to take you to your appointment or drive you to your appointment? Or like next door neighbours quite often, like just putting a stew on the door or putting their bins out, actually doing those actions rather than saying, just ring me if you need me, because quite often those people won't. Again, we always try and avoid those tricky conversations because we don't want to upset somebody. But actually finding out how they're feeling doesn't matter if somebody starts crying. If they don't want to talk about it, they won't. But it's not about being sort of nosy, but avoidance is worse. You might feel that you want to protect somebody and not expose them to too much work, and you can do that through, leaving somebody in peace or over planning or under planning the work that somebody's going to do. Some people want to advise them, say, oh, my Uncle Joe had this type of chemotherapy and he's fine now. That's not acceptable. And again, it's about thinking about those things before you say something. If you see somebody in the cafeteria and you think, oh, they're just back from work, oh, they've had a cancer diagnosis, I'll leave them on their own, I'm sure they just want to be in peace. They don't. They want to be treated as normal as possible. Again, that falsely reassuring somebody when they're not involved in that person's sort of clinical care. So saying, oh, you'll be fine. You'll be absolutely fine. How do we know that? Nobody can give anybody a guarantee. And then, most importantly as well, it's a very private thing, confidentiality. So it's not acceptable to gossip. It's not acceptable to share somebody else's information without that person's consent. So, as a manager as well, that needs to be thought of, but also in areas, there might be areas in your workforce that don't know what's happening with that person, and that should be kept private unless that person wants to tell somebody. I've said these before. So yeah, you pass somebody, oh, you look so well, yeah, and then people walk on by. Those comments, you're strong, you're courageous, you're resilient, you'll beat this, you'll get through it. It's like, how do you know that? People think it's a good thing to say, but actually it's not, because there's so much uncertainty. Nobody knows. You're going to see the world differently now. Silver linings. You will see the world differently, and it does make you look at sort of your values, look at your lifestyle. It does change you, but it doesn't define you. So yeah, you might think about things differently. Work might not be as important as it was before. Oh, and then yeah, that sort of, oh, have you been to get your scan results? What did your oncologist say? It's not a good one to find out, but it may be that you've got a meeting with your employee and you can say that in a different way. Have you recently had an outpatient's appointment? Moving forward, where do we go from here? That one, let me know if I can do anything to help. Yeah. And then the things like, yes, have you tried goji berries and peas and things like that to help? Or I've had a relative who, yes, good stories, bad stories. They may say, oh, yes, I had a relative who had pancreatic cancer and they passed away after 4 weeks. It's not what somebody wants to hear. So, yeah, being careful, being kind, but thinking before speaking. Next slide. So as you are spending time with, your employees and you're trying to work out the best plan, how you can do things. It's about gathering that information, and it's about trying to get as much information as you can, but without being, demanding to know. They will let you, they will give you as much information as they feel they need to do. But also you can reiterate back that you're just checking that information so that you're both on the same page. Sometimes when people are emotional and distressed and thinking about their diagnosis, they might not want to hear a lot of information. They may want written information about work and policies and things like that. So it's important to have better communication and things down so that you can take your time with those questions that you need to ask. You can use supportive materials, as I say. So, if somebody needs if you have an occupational health department, you've got the information and that complex information for that individual, it will be easier to have those things in place, because no two cancers are the same and no two people are the same. So it is a very individual, tailored sort of thing that you need to do. Next slide, please. So as I said before, it's a wibbly wobbly road for people that have. It's a journey. People say it's a roller coaster. There's ups and downs. Nothing is straightforward. Quite often nothing goes to plan. It's the hope, but it's never the reality. And there's always things along the way, the bumps in the road, the time where people are coming up to an appointment and they're worried about their scan, or they're worried about their blood tests. They can't maybe see too much in the future, and they plan things maybe 6 months in advance rather than looking too far into the future because of that uncertainty. And it's just to be aware, really, of that recovery process, and to look at the other things, because, once you've had a cancer diagnosis, somebody can't take that away. You'll always be a person that's either had a cancer diagnosis, got a diagnosis, and or living with a cancer diagnosis. Next slide, please. So what we've looked at is, you need to support your employees because they may want to work through their treatment. Some may not. That really depends. Looking at those things of the flexible working, reduced hours, can they work from home? Are there duties that can be sort of changed around for a period of time? Maybe reduce what targets people need to achieve, relating to what their sort of symptoms and psychological needs are. Give them tasks, or a certain period of time to do tasks. It may be that they've got somebody at work that they can shadow for a bit, or working with a buddy. They don't want to be on their own in an office, but it may be that they want to be with other people. But are they still, have they got still immunity problems? They don't want to put themselves at risk. It may be things at their workstation. Fatigue management advice. Do they need more often breaks, or a longer break, or doing half days rather than full days? And it's about ongoing monitoring that and reviewing that, really. Like I said before, that continuity, so having that dedicated person to liaise with brings out better outcomes. Is there any other support they need? I'm supporting somebody at the moment that their employer is really, really good. So she's a carer, and her husband has a life-limiting lung cancer diagnosis. She enjoys her work, but she's struggling at the moment, and her work give her the time a Wednesday afternoon off so that she can come to Maggie's and do the relaxation session. So she finishes at lunchtime, and yeah, and work have been really, really accommodating, with that. That support that you give to that person, that it is sort of appropriate, that it's timely, and that it's sustainable, and checking on those things really is on a regular basis is really important. Next slide, please. Oh, that might be it. Okay, I saw some things coming through the chat. So I hope that was beneficial for you. Is there any sort of questions that people want to ask? Or is there anything on the chat, Jonathan?
Hi, Trish. Thank
Hi.
you so much. I logged in on my phone because I minimized the team screen, so I was kind of doing two things at once. But yeah, let me look through the chat. I know there was one from Beaky, I think. Sorry, I'm not sure if I've said your name right. But they say, are there laws in place for employers and employees in terms of time off allowed, or does it vary by employer? Is there anything kind of enshrined at law that defines kind of returning to work and policies?
So there is so by law, if somebody has a cancer diagnosis, you're automatically protected by the Cancer in the Workplace Act, and so you can't discriminate against, you can't get rid of anybody, and you're protected by law for that. Really, from employers, it's very much there are no actual designated policies for everybody to use. It's very much sort of HR have a look what they say about their sickness policy. If somebody's sort of like, do they all have full pay? They're going down to half pay. But a lot of the time, when people come back to work, that is a very individual thing. So there's no laws saying what you should do, what you shouldn't do. But if employers get it wrong, it can be hugely costly. So we work with some sort of like solicitors, and quite often what they say, if somebody say somebody's been saying you can't work here anymore because you've got a cancer diagnosis, because you can't do the job that you did before, that would go to like a tribunal, and it would go to HR, and it would be like, because you're being discriminated against. And then there's assumptions there that yes, it does all cancer come under the Disability Act? It covers you. It doesn't mean that you're disabled, but it does cover you under the Disability at Work Act. Yes.
Thank you very much for that, Trish. Another question that's come in, is there ever an issue with people not believing the person has cancer because they don't appear to have what's stereotypically assumed to be the symptoms of cancer or treatment? I know there's been some stories in the news where people have found out that people have been lying about their cancer.
Yeah,
that's quite prevalent.
Well, I think it's perfectly reasonable as an employer, as a manager, to ask for written confirmation, or if they've got a letter from the hospital. There's some things that people might not know, like if they're having radiotherapy, they might not have the dates when they're having the radiotherapy. But if they've been diagnosed with a cancer, they should have some paperwork. So I would hope nobody would do that. But there has to be that two-way street. You can't have somebody that says, I've got cancer, you're treating me differently. You need some documentation for proof from that point of view.
Ruth asks also, are there any slightly different approaches to take with someone coming back to work and they've been given a diagnosis that's terminal, but they want to work or plan work as long as possible?
Yeah. So there's some understanding about what you understand by the word terminal. So some people say terminal is sort of potentially end of life a couple of months, whereas palliative just means we can't cure the disease, but somebody actually might be functioning well enough to work with a palliative diagnosis. So actually, it's knowing where they're up to. But the same things apply, because if somebody wants to work, obviously we want to encourage that if they're well enough to do so, and whether then they're able to do the job they did before. If they're not, able to work to that job description that they did before, then yes, HR probably needs to be involved, because there may be something else within the companies that person can do, or whether they want to work at all. So as I say, every case is individual, but as a manager, HR are normally really, really good HR departments. So it's keeping sort of in communication with them really as well.
Yeah, and I know recently the CEO of Barclays has spoken openly about his cancer treatment, and he said, "Look, I'm choosing to work, but I wouldn't force or dictate what anyone else has to do during their cancer diagnosis or treatment." So I think as you pointed out, kind of in the presentation, it's kind of what that individual wants to do and is kind of capable of doing.
Yeah.
So Fiona says, we mentioned during the presentation about kind of letting someone know that today they're feeling okay or today is a non-cancer day. What are some of the ways that people can do that in the office if they want to kind of signal to people what they're ready to talk about or think about during that day?
I think again, they may say when they come in, I'm not having a good day, so I don't, they might just want to be left in peace. They might want to go out for a walk. Is there anything that you can do sort of like as a team, just to because sometimes they're just having a bad day and they just don't want to talk about those things, so it's keeping things normal, light-hearted, but it's not you're avoiding it. That person has actually said, I don't want to talk about that today. And it's okay to do that and not feel guilty and not feel as if they have to all the time, because they want that separation from work to what's going on in the rest of the do you do any sort of staff support? Do you do any sort of team building things? Do you go for a walk at lunchtime? Or people sort of tend to be sort of on their own at that time? I suppose it depends how many people are like in a big office, or does that employee have much interaction with others during the day in what role they do? And checking in is good, and it's actually all right to say, how are things today? Not maybe not like how are you, but how are things today? If you need to talk about anything, that's fine, but just try and keep things sort of like normal, but not avoiding. And it's hard to do. You don't know what you're going to say until you're faced with that situation. Sometimes there's no right or wrong, and sometimes you don't know what to say, and it's actually all right to say that. I said, I'm really sorry what you're going through, but I don't know what to say. And quite often there isn't anything to say because you can't change what's happened.
Thanks. I think Tony Bishop, you had your hand up momentarily. I'm not sure if you still intend on saying anything.
Yeah, it was just a quick one, really. I know you did sort of like did a section on carers and
Yeah.
how carers can be affected, obviously as well. And it broke up a little bit, but did you allude to that carers are protected under the Disability Discrimination Act as well?
Yes, yes, they are. So again, that's something that to go to the sort of like HR department with. Yeah.
Okay.
Because they may be, you know, entitled to time off, or, you know, reduced working hours or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And now I think the other question I asked earlier, I think it's been answered, was are the slides going to be shared?
Yep. Yes, we will. We will share them. I know there's interesting things going on with the recording in the chat, but on my main computer, it is still recording. So I think I'll be able to share that. But we do these every quarter. So if you missed anything, or you know, you have colleagues who this could be beneficial to, we are doing this again.
That's great. Thank you.
And if anyone has any sort of specific questions that they don't want to ask on here, please send something through, and we can answer them sort of individually then, if anyone has anything.
Great.
Yeah, find your local Maggie Centre. As I say, even if you're just bobbing in and having a brew, and have a look round the beautiful buildings. And it's about sort of sharing that awareness, really, because quite a lot of people walk past Maggie centres and they don't know what they are, because, you know, it's not all sort of, you know, we are cancer care, you know, big Maggie signs outside. So, and they're like home from home. So, you know, us as staff, everyone that comes isn't a patient, isn't a, you know, we're not bothered where they live or what their hospital number is. We don't need to know that. We just need to know that somebody needs some support, whether that's, you know, they've been affected by a cancer diagnosis, they're living with a cancer diagnosis. It doesn't matter if that cancer was 20 years ago, or families, children, or supporting the bereaved. So,
yeah, and I think,
and then we've got things on program. Yeah. People could just pop in for a brew, something on program, whatever, you know, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think kind of, yeah, Charlie Benjamin, yes, your name does appear. They said that cancer diagnosis and treatment can also impact young people going into work, and I think the thing about Maggie's is that we support all different age ranges. You know, usually it's kind of older people who may tend to get cancer more, but definitely there are a range of young people maybe starting work, coming into a Maggie centre because they've been diagnosed.
I'm supporting, so a young lady, she's 19 now, and she's her father has got a palliative diagnosis, and I've been supporting her since she was 17. So, you know, all those things of learning to drive, doing her A levels, she's now in uni, and even though she's in uni sort of 100 miles away from Oldham, we still have weekly contact. There's been bumps in the road. So, you know, as I say, we support any age, and that support continues regardless now that she's at uni somewhere else, and not in the vicinity. But yeah, the people need it more than ever now, that support. People are very vulnerable, and, you know, with the cost of living crisis, the stories that we hear, people going to food banks, people deciding actually whether to have treatment because getting to the hospital is really expensive, eating well, putting petrol in the car, putting their heating on, you know, heartbreaking stories. And, you know, in this day and age, that shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen.
Thank you. I think we've got 2 minutes, so I'll just drop a link to our survey in the chat. It'll take a couple of minutes for you to fill out, but we'd really welcome your feedback. Thank you again. Thank you, Trish, for leading the session today. And for everyone for joining, thank you as well for taking time out of your day. I hope this was useful. We will share the slides, and we'll also share the recording if it's worked, fingers crossed. If not, I have a recording from another session. if you are corporate partners and supporting us and are in touch with your local Maggie Centre, we can do these for your staff and your colleagues if you would like to organise a session. We're always here to talk and help you with any questions about cancer in the workplace as well. Our contact details, I'll share that with you on the slides. But again, thank you for listening and for asking questions today. Thanks, everyone. I will stop the recording. I'll stop the recording and I'll leave the meeting. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.